Today, we profile a 19th century military machine that was not exactly equipped for modern convenience. But first, this episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. CuriosityStream is available on many platforms and web apps, including Roku, Android, Xbox One, smart TVs, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle, and Apple TV. That's a lot. Look, if you've got a device with a screen that isn't like a Casio watch from 1993, you're going to be able to watch CuriosityStream. It's also offered worldwide, and it's constantly updated with awesome, timely content. Right now, for instance, they have a documentary series, The Top Science Stories of 2020. Obviously, it features a lot about COVID-19, but it also dives into CRISPR, the Mars rover, fossilized DNA, and several other exciting bits of news that you might have missed because everyone was talking about COVID. Now, if you clicked on this video because you like submarines, possible, then holy crap, do I have a subscription to sell to you? Because CuriosityStream doesn't just have a wide collection of military documentaries and TV shows, they have a ton of content that is specifically about submarines. Why not check out Silent War, The Battles Beneath the Sea, or 5 Submarines Against the Nazis, or any of their other thousands of pieces of content. You can go to curiositystream.com/brainfood for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series. And right now, as a special deal for Today I Found Out fans, you get a free 30-day trial to try out CuriosityStream. Just use the code BRAINFOOD at checkout. It's a great way to support the show and keep us making more videos, and I really couldn't think of a better fit for sponsorship given that they're all about education as well. Let's get into the video. On the night of February the 17th, 1864, the crew of the Union sloop of war, USS Housatonic, looked out over the moonlit waters of Charleston Harbor and spotted a small, dark shape gliding towards them. At first, they took it to be a porpoise, a common sight in those waters, but as the shape drew nearer, they could see a faint light flickering behind a pair of portholes. By the time they realized what they were looking at, the object was too close for the ship's 12 guns to hit, so the crew opened fire with rifles and pistols, their shots ringing out off the object's iron hull. But it was too late. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped open the ship's side, and within minutes, she plunged to the bottom. USS Housatonic had just fallen victim to an ingenious Confederate contraption called the H.L. Hunley, the first submarine in history to sink a ship in combat. On April the 19th, 1861, a week after the US Civil War began, President Abraham Lincoln ordered a naval blockade of the southern states. More than 500 ships took up stations outside 12 major ports along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts with the aim of starving the Confederacy into submission. Among the cities hardest hit by the blockade was the major trading hub of Charleston, South Carolina, which soon found its economy strangled and its citizens harassed by constant Union shore bombardments. With its mostly agrarian economy and relative lack of heavy industry, the Confederacy could not hope to match the Union Navy in numbers or classes of ships, so military planners began looking for alternative, more technological means of breaking the blockade. Among those who answered the call was James McClintock, a successful engineer and machinist who ran a factory manufacturing steam fittings and gauges in New Orleans. McClintock's business partner and financier was Horace Lawson Hunley, a wealthy lawyer and plantation owner who, on the declaration of war, became so enraged by the Union blockade that he immediately volunteered to serve aboard a Confederate blockade runner ship. Together, McClintock and Hunley began building what they saw as an ideal solution to the blockade problem, a 2-man, hand-cranked submarine called the Pioneer. After months of development, the pair successfully tested Pioneer in the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain, but the Union advance on New Orleans in 1862 forced them to scuttle the prototype and retreat to Mobile, Alabama. Here, they built another submarine, the American Diver, which they initially planned to power using electric motors or a steam engine before finally reverting back to muscle power. By January 1863, the submarine was declared ready for sea trials and towed to Fort Morgan, but heavy weather swamped the craft in transit and she sank in the Mobile Bay. Undeterred, McClintock and Hunley began work on the submarine that would make military history, the H.L. Hunley. Built on the experience gained from the previous submarine designs, the Hunley was remarkably sophisticated for her time, incorporating many features standard to submarines today. 13 meters long and 1 meter in diameter, she was built of riveted iron plates like a marine boiler with countersink rivets and a tapered bow and stern to decrease water resistance. She was crewed by 8 men, 7 of whom propelled the craft via a long crankshaft connected to the propeller. The 8th man, the commander, crouched at the bow, controlling the submarine submarine using a rudder and a pair of bow planes, which could be tilted up and down to make the craft dive and surface. Buoyancy and trim were controlled using a pair of ballast tanks, which could be filled with water using seacocks or emptied using a hand pump. The crew entered and exited the craft through a pair of short conning towers mounted fore and aft, which featured small glass portholes to provide outside visibility when surfaced. A set of folding snorkels and bellows also allowed the Hunley to replenish her air supply while submerged. In the event the Hunley took on water and found herself trapped on the bottom, heavy iron ballast plates were fastened to her keel, with the bolt heads protruding through the door, such that in an emergency the crew could simply undo the nuts to jettison the weights and rise to the surface. Hunley's armament consisted of a single 61-kilogram gunpowder torpedo. While today this word evokes a sophisticated self-propelled submarine weapon, until the 1890s the word torpedo referred to what we now call a naval mine, the word deriving from the torpedo ray, a fish that shocks its prey like an electric eel. Indeed, Union Admiral David Farragut's legendary declaration, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," refers to this kind of stationary explosive charge. Throughout the Civil War, the Confederacy made extensive use of torpedoes, both electrically and contact detonated, to prevent Union ships from penetrating its harbors and rivers, but they proved incapable of breaking the blockade. Vessels like the Hunley were thus developed to carry torpedoes directly to enemy ships. Hunley was originally designed to tow a floating torpedo behind her. On reaching her target, she would dive beneath it, drawing the torpedo against the hull. However, this system was quickly abandoned due to the risk of the tow cable snapping or becoming tangled, and was instead replaced by a spear torpedo, wherein the explosive charge was mounted on the end of a 7-meter-long wooden pole projecting from the bow of the submarine. In combat, the Hunley would ram the torpedo into the side of the target ship, a steel barb on the casing anchoring it to the wooden hull. The crew would then back away from the target until they reached a safe distance, whereupon a long string paid out from the submarine would trigger the torpedo detonator and sink the ship. The spar torpedo was originally developed for use on the CSS David, a steam-powered semi-submersible attack boat first deployed by the Confederacy in October 1863. While the David-class boats carried out several successful attacks, the noise of their steam engines made them considerably less stealthy than anticipated, and the quieter manual propulsion and submerging ability of the Hunley was seen as a superior alternative. Yet despite her advanced design, Hunley was a nightmare to operate. With her 8-man crew crammed into a tiny hull, unable to even sit up straight, her interior quickly became unbearably hot, airless, and stifling. She was also dangerously unstable, and many finer points of her design left much to be desired, as would soon become tragically apparent. H.L. Hunley was built in Mobile and launched in July 1863. Shortly thereafter, she conducted a successful mock attack against a coal barge anchored in Mobile Bay, a demonstration which deeply impressed the supervising officer, Admiral Franklin Buchanan. Hunley was then packed onto a rail car and shipped to Charleston, arriving in the besieged city on August the 12th. McClintock and Hunley had originally intended to pilot the craft themselves in combat. Not only did they believe that the men who designed and built the Hunley were most qualified to operate her, but there was a financial incentive as well. The Confederate government had recently issued a $100,000 reward for anyone who could sink the Union ironclads USS New Ironside and USS Wabash. As Hunley had only cost $15,000 to build, about $250,000 today, her builders stood to make a tidy profit off of such a feat. But the moment Hunley arrived in Charleston, she was confiscated and pressed into the Confederate Navy on the orders of General P.G.T. Beauregard. Navy Lieutenant John A. Payne of the CSS Chicora and 7 men from the Chicora and the CSS Palmetto State volunteered to crew the submarine, and another demonstration was scheduled for August the 29th near Fort Johnson. What happened next was a harbinger of things to come. Shortly after the Hunley got underway, Lieutenant Payne, still climbing in through the forward hatch, accidentally stepped on a diving pane lever, causing the submarine to dive while her hatches were still open. Payne and William Robinson, standing on the aft hatch, managed to jump to safety, but Charles Hasker's leg was caught in the hatch and he was dragged to the bottom. Once the submarine flooded and the pressure equalized, Hasker managed to free himself and swim to the surface. But the other 5 sailors, they were trapped inside and drowned. Yet despite this tragedy, Hunley was immediately raised and returned to service 2 weeks later. On October the 15th, Hunley's new 8-man crew, including Horace Hunley, prepared for another demonstration, conducting a mock attack against the Confederate steamer Indian Chief. At first all went well, the Hunley diving under the Indian Chief and successfully striking her hull with the dummy torpedo. But as the minutes passed, Hunley failed to resurface. Minutes turned to hours, and it soon became clear that the submarine had met with disaster once again. Bad weather delayed the search for the missing sub for nearly a month, and it was not until November the 7th that she was located and raised. On opening her hatches, the recovery team uncovered a gruesome sight: the submariner's bloated corpses still sitting where they died. The cause of the sinking was attributed to what might charitably be called a bit of a design flaw. The bulkheads forming Hunley's forward and aft ballast tanks did not fully extend to the top of the hull, meaning that any excess water was free to spill over into the crew compartment. The seacock for flooding the forward ballast tanks was soon found wide open, while the wrench used to turn it was on the submarine's floor, indicating that either the valve had gotten stuck or Hunley had dropped the wrench and was unable to stop the flooding. The keel weight bolts were also found partially unfastened, indicating that the panicked crew had attempted to drop their ballast before the submarine flooded and drowned them. Once again, the Hunley was raised and refurbished, though bafflingly, the egregious flaw in her ballast tanks was never corrected. Another 8-man crew was duly assembled, commanded by veteran Confederate Army Lieutenant George E. Dixon. After months of training, the crew was finally ready to take the Hunley into combat. On the night of February 17, 1864, the Hunley slipped from her base on Sullivan's Island and headed out into Charleston Harbor, heading for the USS Housatonic, anchored 5 miles offshore. At around 8:45 p.m., the commander of Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island reported a large fireball as the Housatonic exploded and quickly sank. Minutes later, he reported seeing a blue light, a prearranged lantern signal indicating that the Hunley was on her way back home. But Hunley never returned. After that signal, nothing more was ever heard from her. Though she had become the first submarine in history to sink a ship in combat, this feat had come at a terrible price. While 5 of the Housatonic sailors were killed in the attack, over a short career, Hunley had claimed the lives of 21 of her crew. But what happened to the Hunley? For more than a century, the fate of the submarine remained a mystery, historians variously speculating that the crew had been killed by the blast of the torpedo, that a Union sailor had managed to shoot Lieutenant Dixon through one of the portholes, or that the submarine had sprung a leak on the return journey and sunk to the bottom. But it was not until 1970 that underwater archaeologist E. Lee Spence was finally able to locate the wreck of the Hunley. Its location came as a surprise and explained why it had taken so long to find. Previous searchers had assumed that the Hunley would lie on the landward side of the Housatonic, consistent with her sailing home when she sank. Instead, she was found 100 meters seaward of the ship, indicating that she sank soon after the explosion and was carried a short distance by tidal currents. Unfortunately, Spence was unable to obtain permission from the state of South Carolina to excavate the wreck, and it was not until 1995 that another expedition, headed by archaeologist Mark Newell and novelist Clive Cussler, that they relocated the Hunley and began preparations to recover her. On August 8, 2000, H.L. Hunley was raised to the surface and transferred to a special preservation tank at the Warren Lash Conservation Center in North Charleston. With the submarine safely immersed in chilled, slightly electrified water to prevent further corrosion, archaeologists were at last able to start revealing the 136-year-old submarine's secrets. After sinking, the Hunley had slowly been buried under several feet of mud, preserving her in immaculate detail. This mud also filled the submarine's interior, freezing its contents in time. Among the perfectly preserved items was a gold $20 coin belonging to Lieutenant Dixon. At the 1862 Battle of Shiloh, a bullet had struck the coin in Dixon's pocket, saving his leg and almost certainly his life. Dixon had kept the deformed coin engraved with the words Shiloh, April 6, 1862, my life preserver, GED, and carried it around as a good luck charm. But the greatest surprise came when archaeologists uncovered the bones of the Hunley's crew. Normally in cases of submarine sinkings, the victims are found clustered around the escape hatches, but the Hunley's crew were still seated in their stations with no sign of struggle or panic. This indicates that they died quickly and didn't drown as the submarine slowly flooded. But this conflicts with the testimony of the Fort Moultrie commander, who claimed to have seen the Hunley's blue lamp signal shortly after the sinking. It was not until the lantern in question was found inside the wreck that this mystery was at last laid to rest. Not only was the lantern's lens clear, not blue, but in 1864 the term blue light referred specifically to a standard Navy pyrotechnic signal, which could have been launched by the Housatonic or another nearby ship. So whatever it was the fort commander saw, it's unlikely that it came from the Hunley. But the final piece of evidence would not be uncovered until 2017, when archaeologist Paul Mardikian began cleaning sand concretions on the end of the Hunley's torpedo spar and discovered the remains of a copper band and shreds of the torpedo's copper casing. While all previous sources assumed the Hunley was equipped with a barbed torpedo, which could be detached and detonated from a safe distance, this discovery indicates that the torpedo was in fact fixed to the spar and fitted with the contact detonator. This means that the Hunley would have been less than 20 feet from the torpedo when it detonated, so close that the crew would almost certainly have been killed by the blast wave. This theory is supported by a 2017 study by a team from Duke University who constructed scale models of the Hunley and subjected them to variously sized underwater explosions. Dixon's watch was also discovered frozen at 8:45, the generally accepted time of the Housatonic's sinking. Thus, the Hunley's demise was less a case of an attack gone wrong than a bona fide suicide mission. mission. While a clever and pioneering piece of engineering, the Hunley was simply too ambitious for the technology of her time, and it would be another half-century before submarines would become a standard part of naval warfare. But no matter how sophisticated their craft, the life of submariners is still as fraught as that of their Civil War forebears. Not for nothing is it known as the Silent Service. And now for a bonus fact. While the Hunley was the first submarine to sink a ship, it would not be the first to attack one. That honor belongs to the Turtle, a one-man submersible designed by inventor David Bushnell during the American Revolutionary War. Built to break the British blockade of New York Harbor, the Turtle was an egg-shaped craft built of wooden staves and iron hoops like a barrel and measured around 1 meter in diameter and 2 meters tall. She was named after a supposed resemblance to two turtle shells fastened together and featured hand-pumped ballast tanks for diving and surfacing, a small brass conning tower with glass portals for the operator to see through, and was propelled horizontally and vertically by hand-cranked propellers. As her hull could only hold around half an hour of usable oxygen when sealed, oxygen which a candle or oil lamp would quickly consume, internal illumination was accompanied using foxfire, a type of bioluminescent fungus. Turtle's armament consisted of a single 150-pound detachable gunpowder mine with a clockwork timer, which could be fixed to the hull of a ship using a handscrew. Bushnell first conceived of the craft in 1771 and immediately sought backing from the Continental Congress to fund its construction and development. Jonathan Trumbull, the governor of Connecticut, brought Bushnell's request to the attention of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who enthusiastically agreed to fund the project. The Turtle was built by Bushnell along with his brother Ezra, carpenter Phineas Pratt, and clockmaker Isaac Doolittle. Construction and testing stretched on for nearly 5 years, much of this time being taken up by the perfection of an adequately reliable mine and by training, the Turtle requiring an extraordinary amount of physical stamina and coordination to operate. Trials and training took place near Ezra Bushnell's farm on the Connecticut River and in Long Island Sound until in the autumn of 1776 the craft was finally declared ready for combat. Ezra Bushnell was originally to have piloted the Turtle for her first mission, but when he suddenly took ill, he was replaced by Sergeant Ezra Lee. At 11 p.m. on September 6, 1776, Lee climbed into the Turtle and set off into New York Harbor. His target was HMS Eagle, the flagship of British Admiral Richard Howe, moored off Governor's Island. The journey took nearly 2 hours, with Lee having to surface every 30 minutes to replenish his air supply using a set of bellows. His progress was further slowed by an unexpectedly strong tidal current and low visibility. Eventually, however, he managed to reach his target unseen. Flooding his ballast tanks, he dove beneath the Eagle's hull and set about trying to attach the mine. Immediately, Lee ran into problems when the anchoring screw refused to penetrate the hull. It's commonly claimed that Lee was thwarted by the copper plates used to protect the hulls from shipworms and barnacles, but these were paper-thin and would have been no impediment. More likely, Lee had been unlucky enough to strike the ship's iron rudder hinge. But when he tried repositioning the Turtle to try again, Lee found it impossible to maintain neutral buoyancy and bobbed to the surface, where he was spotted by British soldiers on the shore. Exhausted and suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning, Lee abandoned the attack and jettisoned his mine as the soldiers started rowing towards him, hoping they would seize that likewise, and thus all would be blown to atoms. What actually happened was the mine drifted into the East River and exploded some hours later, resulting in no casualties. While the attack was unsuccessful, Lee managed to escape with his life, becoming the first person to operate a submarine under combat conditions. On October 5th, he made another attempt on a frigate anchored off Manhattan, but once again he was spotted and forced to break off the attack. 3 days later, the Turtle was lost when the British sank a tender vessel near Fort Lee, New Jersey. The Continental Army would make no further use of submersibles, though underwater mines did see limited use throughout the Revolutionary War. Of this pioneering attempt at underwater warfare, George Washington would write in 1785 that, "I then thought, and still think, that it was an effort of genius." But, like the later Hunley, Turtle was simply too advanced for the technology of her time, requiring her operator, according to Ernest M. Eller, former head of the U.S. Navy Historical Center, to carry out the combined duties of diving officer, navigator, torpedo man, and engineer, while at the same time fighting tides and currents and propelling the boat with his own muscles. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.